Among the kilesa defilements, ahirika and anuttappa, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear, is the worst. When one lacks moral shame and moral fear, one commits wrongdoing by body, speech, and mind. When one is not shameful, not afraid of misconduct, they perform physical, verbal, mental misconduct. Such kind of person who lacks moral shame and moral fear and thus commit wrongdoings by body, speech and mind will be regarded as an inferior person, degraded person in the society of the wise people. Lack of moral shame and moral fear, not knowing that wrongdoings are frightening, so long as one is having lack of shame and lack of fear, other defilements will also arise. When other defilements, when kilesa defilements are tormenting and suppressing the person will become exhausted, the person will suffer, the person will be burning with kilesa defilements, and the person becomes polluted, low class, inferior, and degraded. Kilesa defilements will be constantly tormenting the person. The example is given here. If people do not know the root cause of an illness, they will not know the way how to prevent, how to cure, and how to uproot the illness. In the same way, not being able to overcome defilements, not able to prevent, cure, suppress, and uproot the defilements, the person will end up having problems such as tension, stress, depression, and so on. Not knowing the ways to prevent, cure, suppress, and uproot the defilements, the person will lack control of oneself. Such things are happening due to ahirika and anuttappa, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear. Not knowing the fault of akusala, unwholesomeness, there will be delusion. The person is said to be in the darkness of delusion. When one indulges in moha, delusion, one becomes mad with delusion. Having delusion, when the person is mad with delusion, then the person is ruthless to perform things that are unlawful, things that are not proper. A mad person, a person who is mad with delusion, can commit all sorts of wrongdoings by body, speech, and mind. The person will be ruthless in evil conduct in body, speech, and mind. And the person ruthlessly commit killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, slandering, harsh speech, frivolous talk, and so on. And the person ruthlessly think about wrongful thoughts, such as wanting to take other people's belongings by force unlawfully, wanting to torture, torment others, and also having wrong view that good deeds do not bring good results, bad deeds do not bring bad results. In this way, the person indulges in wrongdoings, the person ruthlessly performs transgressions, and the person becomes a ruthless person. Sayadaw says, most of the people in the world are ruthless. They are committing wrongdoing by body, speech, and mind. In most of the people in the world, they are overwhelmed with ahirika and anuttapa, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear, and thus they are not shameful of unwholesome deeds. They are not frightened of unwholesome deeds. So they do not withdraw from wrongdoings. They do not withdraw from unwholesome deeds by body, speech, and mind. So in these people, ahirika and anuttapa, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear, prevail. They do not know the force of ahirika and anuttapa, and they do not know the benefits of hiri and ottappa, the benefits of moral shame and moral fear. And thus, they are in darkness of delusion, and they are mad with delusion. When people are mad with delusion, when they are crazy with delusion, they cannot control their mind, and they cannot control their activities, and thus they end up being violent, and they commit all sorts of violent things. So Sayadaw says, most of the people in the world are mad or crazy with delusion. When ahirika and anuttapa, lack of moral shame and lack of moral fear, overwhelm the person is no longer shameful of wrongdoings by body, speech, and mind. The example is given here. Animals such as pigs or dogs are not disgusted with the feces. This is compared to a person who lacks moral shame, and thus the person relishingly commits wrongdoings. The person does not withdraw from evil doings. The person relishes and likes to perform unwholesome things. As the person lacks moral shame, the person is not disgusted with wrongdoings, and thus the person again and again, repeatedly commits wrongdoings, which makes the person low class and degraded. The person who commits wrongdoings is morally degraded. When one does not refrain one's body and speech, if there is no restraint of one's wrongful behavior by body and speech, then the person is losing one's moral conduct. Abstaining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, taking intoxicants, abstaining from them is the basic moral conduct for a human being. These 5 precepts should be followed, should be practiced, not only by the Buddhists, but it should be practiced by every human. Abstaining from killing, stealing, sexual misconduct, lying, taking intoxicants, abstaining from them is the human discipline. So one should follow this human discipline. Being able to practice the moral conduct, one will shine with virtue and one is morally uplifted. One is uplifting oneself by practicing the moral conduct, and the person is fulfilling sila, morality, and thus the person is shining with virtue. If one does not have moral conduct, the person will be dim, vague. The person will not shine with virtue. Most of the people in the world are dim, vague, and they do not shine with virtue, as they fail to practice moral conduct. Not having the moral shame from wrongdoings, it is ahirika. And anuttapa is compared to the moth, the bug that goes to light, and the bug dies because of the light. In the same way, a person who lacks moral fear, they are ruthless, just like a bug when goes into light dies. So it is compared to a person who lacks moral fear. When there is lack of moral fear, one does not have a good control of oneself. The person is ruining one's own world as well as harming the surrounding world. When the person lacks moral shame and moral fear, the person does not have good control of oneself, and thus the person commits things that are wrong. The person is not pure, the person is not clean, polluted, and the person is causing much problems. When one cannot control one's anger, one's aversion, the person herself is inferior, and when the person commits wrongdoing, such as killing others, how will the victim be? The victim will suffer. The person is also causing physical and mental suffering to others. If the person steals other people's property, how would the victim will be? The victim will suffer. And if the person commits sexual misconduct to women who are under the guardianship of parents, how would the parents react if his or her daughter is the victim? Even though one has one's own partner, but if one is having sexual relationship with others, how would one's partner feel? If a person is lying, deceiving in order to ruin others, how will the victims feel? And when one takes intoxicants, the person can get illness, kidney illness, illness with liver, and so on. And also, the surrounding will suffer due to the violence caused by intoxicants. And many tragedies are caused by intoxication. Just as the insect that goes into light, that goes into fire, it is compared to anuttapa, not frightened of wrongdoing. When there is anuttapa, the person will not be frightened of wrongdoings, and thus the person ruthlessly commits evil conduct, and thus the person's own world is ruined, as well as the surrounding world will not be peaceful. So it is losing in two ways when people lack moral fear. Understanding the bad consequences of ahirika and anuttapa, one should develop hiri and uttapa, moral shame and moral fear. If each and every one in the world has hiri and uttapa, moral shame and moral fear, how will the world be like? If one is committing transgression, it is harming others. It is important that one feels shameful, one feels disgusted with the wrongdoings. When one is shameful of wrongdoings, the person will withdraw from wrongdoings. It will happen to only those who have power of prudence. The person who has power of prudence will be shameful, will be disgusted with the wrongdoings. When one sees feces, one will be disgusted with the feces. The person will withdraw when seeing feces. It is compared to hiri, moral shame. Having moral shame, one will feel disgusted with the wrongdoings, and thus the person will not commit transgression. The characteristics of hiri is feeling shame on wrongdoings, having disgust on wrongdoings. And when one have the chance to commit wrongdoings, the person who has hiri will withdraw from wrongdoings. The person will flinch away from wrongdoings, and it is called sankochana. Having moral shame, one's intention to commit wrongdoings will not be strong. There will not be any cetana, any bad volition to commit wrongdoings. The person will be reluctant to commit wrongdoings. The person will flinch away. The person will withdraw from wrongdoings. When this happens, the person's body, speech and mind will be pure and clean. Having moral shame, one does not want to lose one's virtue, and one withdraws from wrongdoing, as one is reluctant to lose one's reputation, one's virtue, and it is called sankochana. When it is said that the person withdraws, when the person flinches away from wrongdoing, it is not defeating, but instead one is having self-defense away from wrongdoing. In this way, one is reluctant from wrongdoing, and thus one controls oneself. One will have self-defense away from these wrongdoings, so that the person's wrongdoing will become less and less. Practicing the three trainings, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, one will have a good self-defense away from wrongdoing, and thus gross, medium, and refined form of wrongdoing will get less and less. Problem-creating acts, the problem-creating actions will get less and less. That's why hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, plays the important role in eliminating wrongdoing. The person will become more and more purified, more gentle, more cultured, and more peaceful. One should know the flaws of ahirika, lack of moral shame, and one should know the benefit of hiri, moral shame. Having the understanding of the benefits of hiri, one will cherish it, one will value the benefits of hiri. Ottappa is moral fear, moral dread or fear from wrongdoing. When one has moral fear, one will withdraw from wrongdoing, and by practice of Sikha, the three trainings, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, one will have a good self-defense away from wrongdoing, and thus one is uplifting one's life. There will be purity. Hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, are called Sukha Dhamma. They are the white Dhamma that makes the person purified. Hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, also protect the world so that the world will not be ruined, and thus it is called Lokapala, guardians of the world. Having hiri and ottappa, one controls oneself, and thus one's own world will not be ruined, and also the surrounding will be peaceful and there will not be problems. Having hiri and ottappa is beneficial for both sides, for one's own world as well as the surrounding world. If one does not have Paṭisaṅkkhāna bala, power of prudence, even though one has Paṭisaṅkkhāna bala, but if one makes use of it, if one does not make use of Paṭisaṅkkhāna bala, one will not know that wrongdoings are shameworthy and frightening. Not knowing that wrongdoings are shameworthy and frightening, one commits these transgressions, and one's body, speech, and mind will not be pure, clean, but it will be gross, rude, it will be burning and disgusting. Having Paṭisaṅkkhāna bala, power of prudence, one will know that wrongdoings are shameworthy and frightening, and one will not be committing wrongdoing by body, speech, and mind. One will find ways in order to avoid these wrongdoings, and one will systematically make use of these methods in order to keep one's body, speech, and mind blameless, pure, clean, gentle, and peaceful. When one has hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, the person will be uplifted. And one's body, speech, and mind will be pure and clean. And one will develop saddha, faith, and confidence in the practice. By practicing satipatthana also, one develops saddha, faith, and confidence, and one will understand it through one's experience of practice. But now Sayadaw has been explaining in theory. When one develops saddha, faith, and confidence, one's body, speech, and mind will be pure, clean, gentle. And one will also develop jhana, strong will to practice, to refrain from wrongdoings. There will be diligent effort, viriya. When there is diligent effort, one will have good protection, a good control of oneself with sati, mindfulness. When sati, mindfulness becomes strong, the mind will be unified. There will be samadhi. And one comes to know the true nature. Having these saddha, viriya, sati, and samadhi, faith and confidence, effort, mindfulness, and concentration, the mind becomes strengthened with these mental powers. Just as when one takes nutritious food, by taking nutritious food, one's materiality will be fresh and healthy and strong. In the same way, having the mental powers, having the mental strength, saddha, viriya, sati, samadhi, faith and confidence, effort, mindfulness and concentration, the mind will be strengthened. And the mind will be strengthened, and there will be hiri and ottappa moral shame, and moral fear. When the mind is strengthened, when the person has hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, one will not want to lose his mental strength. The person will be reluctant to lose mental strength, and thus the person practices the three trainings, sila, samadhi, panya. Practicing the three trainings, sila, samadhi, panya, morality, concentration, and wisdom, the person will have good self-defense, and hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, will become stronger and stronger. By practicing Satipatthana meditation, when one develops the knowledge of Uddiyabaya Jnana, the knowledge into arising and passing away of the object, the person develops strong hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear. At this stage of practice, hiri and ottappa becomes very strong that the yogi feels shameful and afraid to miss or to fail to note the object. The person, the yogi, has moral shame and moral fear to lose mindfulness, and the person feels shameful and afraid of defilement entering into the mind. When this happens, yogi becomes even more diligent in the practice in order to purify oneself, and the yogi develops strong sati, mindfulness, samadhi, concentration, and panya, wisdom. So later on in the practice, when the yogi gains to this stage, yogi will understand from his or her experience. So now yogis need to practice diligently, cherishing the Dhamma, valuing the Dhamma, and they should be practicing with faith and confidence, according to the guidance, according to the teaching of the Buddha. When one knows the bad consequences of ahirika and anuttappa, the bad consequences of lack of moral shame and moral fear, one does not want ahirika, anuttappa to arise, and one will have strong will in order to purify oneself. Having jhana, strong will to purify oneself, one will make diligent effort. Not knowing the bad consequences of ahirika and anuttappa, the person will not have jhana, the will to purify oneself, and thus the person will not make any effort, and thus the person will not be developing sati, samadhi, panya, mindfulness, concentration, and wisdom, and the person, hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, will not get any stronger. Having hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear, the person will able to refrain oneself from wrongdoings. The person will have strong will in order to purify oneself, in order to refrain from wrongdoings, and thus the person will make diligent effort in the practice. That's why Sayadaw has been explaining, comparing ahirika and anuttappa, lack of moral shame and moral fear, to hiri and ottappa, moral shame and moral fear. And Sayadaw will continue to explain tomorrow. Sadhu, sadhu. Sadhu.